There's been growing concern from activists that the country's Births and Death Act currently excludes 4 categories of children from having their births registered in South Africa. The Legal Resources Centre says it has been inundated with requests from parents who have tried to register their children's births without success. With cases piling up, the human rights organisation is now taking the plight of these parents to court. Charlene Kreuser, who is the candidate attorney in the LRC's Cape Town office, joins us now to tell us what they've identified as some of these shortcomings in the Act and the work that they're doing to try and fix that for parents and guardians alike. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Charlene. Maybe let's start with a broad explanation of what exactly is the problem that exists within the Act that has left parents and guardians in the situation that has led you to take the issues to court.
Good morning. First off, thank you so much for having me. So our case really has quite a long history. We have found that, as you explained over the years, we have been inundated with parents and guardians contacting us with issues in registering their children's births. In terms of the Births and Deaths Registration Act, parents and guardians are required to register children's birth within 30 days of the birth. After 30 days, you can still register your child's birth, but then there are extra requirements that come into play. If you are South African and you are documented, that is no problem at all. The issue comes in where you are South African and you perhaps do not have an ID document. Then it is quite difficult for parents to register their children's birth. The same thing happens if, for example, you are a foreign national whose child was born in South Africa. You have a permit, but your partner does not. In that situation also, it is difficult to register your child's birth. In that situation, that is our first category of children. Technically, the Births and Deaths Registration Act does provide for that category, where one parent has some form of documentation, whether they're a South African citizen or not. The issue that we've encountered with that category is that the Births and Deaths regulations aren't properly enforced by Department of Home Affairs officers. The second and third category of children, the issue there with the Births and Deaths regulations are that this category are simply not provided for. And this is where you are an undocumented individual, again, whether South Africa or non-South African. The Births and Deaths regulations do not provide for you to register your child's birth after 30 days if you are undocumented. And similarly, if you are an asylum seeker in South Africa with an expired permit, you cannot register your child's birth after 30 days. The final category of children that are excluded by the regulations are those individuals who were abandoned or orphaned as children. So many of our clients who fall in this category are South African born to South African citizens. However, because they were abandoned as children and do not necessarily have any DNA evidence from their parents or documentations, the regulations make it difficult for them to register their birth once they become adults themselves. And this is because often social workers also then have struggled to register their birth, and there's just simply no provision made for these now adults to register their own births.
And of course, it's very worrying what you've just described to us, because one can only imagine the myriad of issues that it will create for someone who was unable to register a birth, should they be looking to get a job, access to grants or whatever social needs that they may require, given the tough times that we are living in at the moment. Maybe just paint a picture for what the clients actually go through in terms of the ripple effects of being unable to register a birth because of the inhibitants that are created by the Act, as you've so eloquently broken down to us.
I want to focus on our fourth category of clients to paint a picture, because I think they really illustrate the intergenerational impact of not having a birth registration. So we have a client. She was born in South Africa to presumably South African parents. She was abandoned as a child. She entered a children's home where she grew up. She was unable to finish high school because she does not have a birth certificate. That was one of the first major prohibitory requirements. Although she was able to access healthcare throughout her life, when at certain stage, it becomes quite difficult because, of course, nurses and doctors start asking questions if you do not have a birth certificate. So beyond, for example, being in an accident or being ill, you now have the added stress of you can't explain to a doctor who you are, where you came from, or anything of that kind. Let's say she is now 19, 20 years old. She hasn't been able to finish high school. She doesn't have a birth certificate. This means she can't get an ID document. This means she cannot vote. She has children of her own, but she cannot register their births because she has no way to prove who she is, that she is in fact who she says she is. This child now is also undocumented. This client of ours, she cannot find formal employment. She has no way to finish or like enter tertiary education. She cannot apply for a government grant because she has no documentation for that. This affects her child as well. So you can really see the ripple effect here that, you know, a birth certificate really enables you to access all this wide range of rights. If you are a child born in South Africa to foreign parents and you do not have a birth certificate, you are going to face similar challenges. You are going to struggle to access education, although technically you are not supposed to. We do see clients coming in with issues with children accessing education. You may have issues accessing vaccinations or healthcare, which of course has not only an impact on you as a child, but also on children and people around you. If you do happen to finish high school and you finish high school, it also, of course, as soon as you don't have a birth certificate and you want to apply for your own type of, let's say, passport to perhaps return to the country of your parents' country of origin, or perhaps once you become 18 and you comply with all the requirements to apply for citizenship, you also cannot apply for citizenship if you do not have a birth certificate. So a birth certificate really allows us to have an identity in a country. And I think the important thing to remember here is that the risk of not having a birth certificate, besides these rights, the risk of not having a birth certificate means that you may become stateless. That means we do not know who we belong to, where we belong, and essentially that means we don't exist to the state.
Yeah, no, and that's a very worrying trend, especially if you've been inundated with various requests from people looking for assistance from your organization. So maybe tell us a little bit about the court action that is currently underway and what it is that you are looking to achieve, perhaps the short to the medium term, for those who are desperately looking to have some form of identity, to, as you've just described, actually live in the country.
So our case was launched in October of 2022. We launched our application against the Minister of Home Affairs and the Director General of Home Affairs. We are at the moment representing a number of parents who are representing 21 children. For them, for the short term, what we want to achieve is that the Department of Home Affairs be obligated to provide them birth certificates within a set timeline of should we win the case. That's the short-term goal. The long-term goal with the case is, and what we are asking for the court to look at, is declare the births and deaths regulation unconstitutional insofar as they either do not provide for certain categories of children to get birth certificates, or where there's an issue with the enforcement of regulations. And in that regard, we really also want there to be clear directives issued to each Department of Home Affairs office, because I think any one of us who has had to interact with the Department of Home Affairs, you get different types of services at different offices, or rather, perhaps an official is more willing to help you than another. So that is the long-term goal really, is to ensure that every single child that is born in South Africa, whether you are born to parents who are South African or parents who are non-South African, again, whether they are documented or whether they are undocumented, each child has the right to a birth certificate. Your right to a birth certificate isn't attached to your parents' existence, because it's about you as a child having to enter the world and have some sort of a recognition that you are alive. So that is definitely our long-term goal. Short-term, we would like, at least for our clients, they need to get immediate birth certificates as soon as the case is done. We are still fairly beginning stages, so we have filed our papers and sent them to our respondents. We have established a timeline with the Minister of Home Affairs and the Director General of when we can expect their response to our submissions, and then of course we'll go through another round of submissions before we get to the actual court hearing.
And just as a final thought from you, as you mentioned the Department of Home Affairs, have you had any conversations outside of the legalities and the court submissions that are currently being made at the moment in terms of their willingness to make some form of change to ensure some long-term sustainability when it comes to the registration of births in South Africa?
We are in conversation with the Department of Home Affairs. There are a number of civil society organizations, department officials involved that have fairly open discussions about the willingness. If we look at the white paper that came out, I think it was 2 years ago, we submitted comments last year, it looked like they are open to reforms on the births and deaths regulations, as well as just identity documents in general. Of course, that is still very much in a beginning phase, but it does look like there is, at least from that perspective, there might be some openness. But of course, it is quite alarming still to see that there are public officials going out and making opposite statements.
Thank you very much for breaking down the issues that persist in that regard. Charlene Kreuser, who's the candidate attorney at the LRC's Cape Town office.